The famous scientist Isaac Newton once said, "I can calculate the motion of heavenly bodies, but not the madness of people." Now, what is he talking about? Well, a few hundred years ago, he lost a whole lot of money in the South Sea bubble trying to invest successfully. It did not work out well. And what he realized is that even though he could figure out how the universe worked, he could not figure out how people worked, or how people thought, and how emotional people can be, in particular when investing their money. Now, today, we call that term sentiment. So you might hear, well, investor sentiment is high, investor sentiment is low, and that is another way of saying the market is moving in a direction not driven necessarily by fundamentals of these companies, but by the way people feel about these companies. We're going to look at a brief chart from 2023 as a perfect example of how Isaac Newton's famous quote can come into play when it talks about how people feel about the market and the kind of impact that it can have on the short term. All right, so let's dig in. We're going to look at the full year's performance for 2023. Now, there were really two markets in 2023. There was January through November, where January through about August, the market started going up, and then August through November, you actually had a pretty big drawdown. The market dropped around 10%. And from that period, from January till essentially the end of October, you were up a little less than 9%, which is pretty good. So 8.7%, you're almost through the year. That is not a bad year in the market. Now, if you broke it down and you started looking, well, from August to November, or August to the end of October, you're down around 10%. Now, what is that? Were there big changes in the market? Did something happen? No. Investor sentiment changed. The way people felt about the market started to shift towards the negative. And so starting in the summertime, the market drew down about 10%. Companies were not 10% less profitable. Dividends did not go down 10%. People just changed the way they felt about those dividends and about those earnings, which meant the price went down. Now, if you were sitting there looking in late October and you were starting to read about investor sentiment, you see the portfolio and the market start to go down around 10%, you might start to think, maybe I should react. The market's starting to go down, I need to get out before it's too late and I lose my money, etc. Well, how would that have played out for you if you would have given in to some of this sentiment talk? Well, what happened at the end of October through the rest of the year? Well, starting October 27th, the market went up in basically a period of 2 months. The market went up over 16% during that time period. And so you went from having an average rate of return to having a really nice rate of return in the stock market, mostly driven by 2 months worth of returns at the end of the year. And again, just like when the market dropped around 10% between August and November, you think, okay, well, what changed? The only thing that changed were the way people felt about the market, or sentiment. And so when Isaac Newton is referring to, essentially, I can explain to you the laws of the universe, but I cannot explain to you when people are going to change their mind. And as long-term investors, we can look at 2023 as a great example of the market was slow and steady for a while, then it just decided that people don't like the market anymore, and just as quickly as they decided they didn't, they decided they did. And so as long-term investors, looking at these sort of short-term movements can create a lot of whipsaw in your portfolio, especially if you're thinking about making decisions based on that. And hopefully, if you can look at this and see, okay, investor sentiment doesn't drive anything around earnings, around dividends, and around what these companies are actually worth. And so most importantly, stick with your long-term plan. And as I always say, know what you own and know why you own it.